The second DLC for Remnant 2 has been out for some time now. I played through it probably about 5 times in total and collected all of the new loot available through the various puzzles and combat scenarios. While the Forgotten Kingdom is in no way a bad DLC, it is also not a good one. Just some more content for Remnant 2 players to run through a couple of times. Let's do a full review of the DLC, and yes, this video will be critical of a game I love. With almost 900 hours and probably more content created for the game than most people, I will be pointing out all the good, but also not holding back on the bad. So let's get into it. The DLC takes place in a brand new world, or, well, scratch that, it takes place in Yaesha again. This time everything is blue and purple, and we've gone back in time essentially. We're here for the third time, actually fourth time if you played the entire series. Yaesha is known for its puzzles, as there are traps to avoid, arrows being shot at you, and overall it can be easily compared to an Indiana Jones style of puzzle crafting. Very adventurous and funny when you get caught off guard, but overstays its welcome after the third time you do it. My main issue with this new world is the design itself. First off, everything just blends together. There's gray and blue, and that's about it. You're going to spend the entire time looking at one color palette, and there's nothing to offset that. Compare this to the first DLC for the world of Losomn, where you have a rainy dock, move into houses set on fire, towards a castle shimmering from its shiny surfaces, into a dungeon that looks dark and dingy. Yes, a lot of this DLC was the same color palette as well, but things changed here and there to keep you engaged. Yaesha is just blue now, and very quickly blends into nothingness in your mind. Also, the actual paths that you're going to take are way worse this time around. The first DLC had doors that would connect back on each other, similar to a Dark Souls style, and ran you through a city of shacks and guards fighting the civilians. But for Yaesha, it feels so much smaller since everything has you going up and down. The first section you move a large stone structure that leads you to the different floors. In the second section, you're going to scour the jungle floor and climb trees to walk directly above the section you were just on. From what I was told, the DLC is the same size as the last, but it feels really small when compared because you're always in the same area as before, just on a different level. This world itself is not that appealing overall, and we've already been to Yaesha many times, knowing exactly what to expect. This DLC actually came with many more new enemies when compared to the first. This is a good thing, of course, as new enemies are really great just for variety's sake. Sadly, all of these enemies suck to fight and are more annoying than anything else. Mainly because the devs keep doubling down on this hidden weak spot mechanic. Very few of these monsters have easy to access weak spots, and almost all of them are immune to bleed. That immediately kills a large section of builds since they even added items in these areas that are for bleed. Weak spots are there so you can get more damage by aiming better. This style here of forcing you to shoot a flower to open them up or hiding it behind the enemy is more frustrating than it is fun. So here are some of the new enemies. There are these pots that shoot several different types of projectiles at you with very little visual cues. Flying statues that have several delayed attacks. Plant monsters who shoot lightning from the sky several times over. The most annoying enemy ever, this dragon that slams on the ground 3 times and screams, leaving you unable to do anything. That enemy is impossible to dodge correctly in co-op as you just don't know who they're lunging at. Then, of course, is the new deer aberration with an affix or buff that spawns on your body and instantly kills you. Yes, lots of new things to fight, but almost all of them are annoying and will have you avoiding the DLC as much as possible when rerunning through the game. But what about the bosses? This is what Remnant as a series is known for and why you play it in the first place. There are 3 new bosses, the first being a large pot that shoots lasers and plasma rock at you. This is a bullet hell boss. If you're familiar with Shahala from Naruto in this game, that is the best comparison. The boss just throws a lot of stuff at you. He lasers the entire arena, so you need to dodge to one side every few seconds. He throws these rocks at you, so you need to dodge during that to avoid both attacks at the same time. Then he also throws out a ton of blue laser lines that slowly clutters the arena, finally resorting to 3 melee attacks with fire covering the room. I really don't like bullet hell bosses, and that is all this guy is. You're forced to split your attention 3 ways for the entirety of the fight, as he's always doing 2 things at a time. And this weak spot is not really that bad at being the crystals on him, but it also is not always easily available to you. Co-op, of course, makes this fight a joke, as you could just stand behind a laser shield and all heal each other through the attacks, but many different builds get stomped here as there are too many visual components at one time. Next up, we have the Gladiator, which is a small square room with a stone guardian inside. This guy also has a really sucky weak spot to hit and is immune to bleed. Now on launch, this guy was actually dealing way too much damage. It got fixed recently, but overall, this one I don't care for either. He's way too aggressive, which is perfectly fine for dodging as the timings are all delayed, making it easy to get down after a few tries. But if you chose to use a gun build, you almost never get any time to shoot the target. Phase transitions are great with statues forcing you to run in between them, but guns, which are what this game is known for, don't feel good to use here. Finally, we come to Yaesha, the final boss, and I actually like everything about this fight. Delayed attacks, spinning at you with her flying head, shooting orbs at you. It's tough at first, but very doable. All up until the end. The only boss in the entire game to have a DPS check. Fail to kill her fast enough near the end, and walls are going to close in to crush you. This feels incredibly unnecessary and like just another way to limit build potential in this DLC. Overall, all the bosses are some of the worst in the game, greatly limiting many different types of builds you can use on them, which causes you to simply avoid them as much as possible, thus trying to not do the DLC at all. Invoker, of course, is the best part of this DLC. It's the new skill-based class that's obviously overpowered and better than any other class in the game's current state. To get this, you need to head into this room filled with sand, walk over to the corner where one of the arrows is not firing correctly, and stand there. After what we assume is 5 minutes, you die and fall into the room below where the class item is waiting. This is by far one of the worst design choices by the devs for almost the entire game. Invader has you fight a special root monster after invading people's dreams. Archon has you go into the back rooms. Alchemist has you get caught by a rat and win the fight against him. Summoner is crafted from a special altar after finding Blood Moon items. Engineer is hidden near a dead explorer in the fog of Nerud. Ritualist has you hop on some boats and defeat a chanting witch. Invoker has you go AFK for 5 entire minutes. Incredibly lazy design that is not interesting at all, just merely frustrated our entire party. After around 9 hours of playing the DLC 3 times over, we had to be told how to get the item. Because even though we thought of standing on that sand in the right place, why would we have guessed to wait 5 entire minutes, wasting the player's time for no reason? Now, thankfully, once you do get this Invoker class, it's well worth it. The class has 3 skills that all serve a similar purpose. One shoots massive lightning strikes across the entire area after a wave of water. The other offers healing from flowers and grants lifesteal. Then the last allows you to crit more and deal blast damage every so often. The first ability is way too strong, the second is very well balanced, and the third is far too niche and difficult to work with correctly. Invoker itself cools down your skill upon skill usage and doubles the skills you have. So everybody and their moms hopped on to create infinite skill cooldown builds, which is definitely more fun than anything the game has had to offer since release, because being a true mage is what we all really want. Amazing class for sure that becomes even more fun when you run with friends. Me and 2 buddies ran through the entire game all using different Invoker skills, never died to even a single boss on Apocalypse, and defeated them all quicker than some of the best builds ever made. That run there in and of itself was extremely fun and made the DLC feel very worth it. Of course, with this DLC brought many new items into the game. Mods, mutators, guns, armor, relics, and melee options. Almost anyone who has ever touched Remnant 2 will grab the DLC just for this stuff, being well worth it. Several amulets now create the best builds in the game. The new sand gun is the best gun in the game, increasing your crit for any build and adding a massive tornado that deletes everything it touches. A lot of this stuff was fun to get through the puzzles or random loot drops. Here are several of the standout items and my thoughts on them. Egg Drink is the new consumable that requires you to take an egg back to the cook at Ward 13, wasting the player's time once again as you need to randomly keep checking with this guy to see when the item is finished. This is another time where the devs doubled down on a time-wasting mechanic which should just not exist. Mudtooth's hat is now in the game, which requires more talking to Mudtooth for who knows how long, wasting the player's time. True Crimson Crown is really cool and something we've all wanted since the game's release. Monolith, or the Sandstorm gun, that might be one of the best items in the game. Polygun, or a labyrinth puzzle gun requiring you to play a minigame while shooting. Most players will never use this as it requires too much effort, but it is cool nonetheless. Thorn is a automatic weapon that explodes similar to a Needler from Halo and can lead up to some very high damage numbers. Trinity Crossbow, which is a cool primary that has an open mod slot. This requires you to play through the DLC a minimum of 3 times in order to open a door, and honestly it's just an okay weapon. The Profane Relic, which is the new best relic in the game as it lets the player heal while shooting. Just massive lifesteal that never requires you to take a relic again. Of course, we do have 2 melee options, one being another flail and then the other being a staff. Zero Divide Amulet, granting infinite ammo and 15% range damage. Rita Vaunt, which increases mod damage and lets you have a chance to not consume a mod charge on use. Magnifying Glass, increasing skill and mod duration, and size, which seems extremely overpowered, having your mods cover the entire screen on use. Token of Favor, the new best ring in the game, increases damage and crit chance with exposed targets. Ring of Ordnance, which potentially grants infinite ammo to engineers' turrets. While they don't need it, it is quite fun. Honestly, you can have a ton of fun messing with all these different items, making the DLC well worth your time just for the experimentation alone. Well, what do I think of the story this time around? It might be the worst part of the DLC. Considering everything I've mentioned so far, that's not great. We go back to the early Yaesha and meet a Pan who is looking for a better future. Then meeting Lydusa, the stone goddess who is fractured. The Pan stripped her of her power after she went mad, but she went mad because her lover was taken away. You can either fix her or return the orb to the wrong location in which she is still fractured and you defeat her. I obviously left out quite a bit of details, but that is the entire story. This has nothing to do with Remnant 2 in almost any way. Yeah, it does connect back to Keula and the Blue Goddess and Yaesha currently, but those two were borderline irrelevant to begin with. With the One True King, we had a ton of build-up there. Seeing the council betray him, watching the Red Prince scheme from the background only to become king himself, the imposter ruling over while the king slept, for it all to boil over and the king starts slaying everyone, even his own guard. With the second DLC, you have this random stone goddess whose relevance is not important to anything. Yaesha does not change in any way because she is saved or defeated. It's not even hard to follow at all, there's just no depth here. This DLC could have had no story whatsoever, and the significance probably would have stayed the exact same as it is now. Ultimately, I am not a fan of this DLC. It isn't bad by any means because there's a lot of new stuff to try out, but it isn't good in any way either. Lazy mechanics like standing in sand, a story that might as well not be there, and being on Yaesha yet again with enemies that are very annoying to fight. Bringing up another issue with this DLC is that there's no content here. Like I said, you collect all the gear, then you run back to the first DLC to instantly kill stuff with the Invoker because it's fun. Remnant 2 needs the survival mode that it had in the first game. Better yet, it needs a boss rush. The game is already roguelite in some of its features, and the first game did pretty well with this mode too. Without this, there's just nothing to do after you grab the gear. Of course, you can do what I do and run through the game time and time again, but it's all the same content. We need the other mode to shake things up a bit. And while a massive balance patch did release alongside the DLC as well, it made balance way worse in this game than before. Several forms of crit damage, mainly ranged and melee, was nerfed hard in order to stop it from being the best option no matter what. But then they also released new crit items that are the best and the only thing to use in the game for optimal damage, as well as making mod damage and skill damage 10 times better than ranged. Why aim and work hard for weak spots when I can hold down Havoc form forever and defeat the boss far quicker? Balance is just all out of whack now, and I'm fine with no balance. Let stuff be overpowered to have fun with it. But it seems really weird to nerf a whole bunch of stuff because it's too OP, and then add new stuff that's more OP than the other stuff ever was. At the end of the day, you can play this game however you want. Everything works even on the hardest difficulty, so just enjoy yourself. But as somebody who loved the first game and this sequel as well, the second DLC was very mediocre. I really don't want to play it at all and try to avoid going through that area as much as possible. Every time I see one of these new bosses, I go, oh boy, here we go again, rather than when I get, say, the Bruin or One True King and instantly get very excited. Everything about this DLC was just a downgrade from the first. Hopefully you did enjoy this video, and yes, I'm aware it's mostly negative. I have probably over 80 positive videos on Remnant, and I gave the last DLC a 10 out of 10. Still love Remnant 2 and play it every day, but the stuff they doubled down on wasting player time for no reason at all, is not adding anything to the game. And creating another DLC that adds nothing to the overall story when we don't even have an ending for the main part of the game is not good for Remnant 2. Upon the game's release, we ended with the entire universe being exploded or erased. Why would anything else in the game matter if we don't get a resolution for that plot point? Either way, do consider liking the video if you watched all the way through. Thanks for everything, and I'll catch you next time.